I was 13 when my mother died. Cancer, fast-moving and merciless. One day she was brushing my hair and humming old Bollywood songs, and the next she was too weak to sit up without help. By the time the silence took over our house, my dad had aged 10 years in a matter of months. So had I. For a while it was just the two of us. Awkward dinners, 2 quiet mornings, a strange grief that neither of us knew how to talk about. Then came Laila. She arrived soft-spoken and sugar-sweet, a friend of a friend who just wanted to help. She brought warm food and light conversation, coaxed my father back into the world like she was doing him a favor. I saw it happening. How he started laughing again, dressing up, playing music in the kitchen. I wanted to be happy for him, and maybe a part of me was. But something about her smile made my stomach knot in ways I couldn't explain. They married 6 months later. That's when the rules changed. First, it was little things. My favorite mug went missing. My books were moved without me touching them. She'd speak softly to my dad, but with me. Her tone shifted, polite but pointed. If I came into the room, she'd stop talking. If I laughed too loudly, she'd glance at me like I was being disrespectful. She never yelled. She didn't need to. I remember one night I was studying in the dining room, a test coming up. Laila walked in, smiled and said, "Maybe you should go to bed. Math doesn't seem to be your strong suit anyway." She said it sweetly like a joke, but her eyes weren't laughing. My dad didn't hear it. He was in the other room watching TV, happy to have someone who smiled at him again. So I said nothing. That became my survival strategy. Silence. I learned to blend in like wallpaper. Speak only when spoken to. Smile just enough to keep things calm. But I watched everything. I took mental notes of her expressions, her passive-aggressive digs, the way she always made sure to look like the innocent one when my dad walked into the room. She would cook dinners and insist I eat more, always watching, always smiling. Sometimes I felt sick afterward. But I told myself I was imagining things. What kind of person thinks their stepmother might be trying to hurt them? Still I stayed alert. I didn't trust her. Not because of one moment, but because of hundreds of them. Whispers, glances, 2 sweet words that left a bitter taste. Laila was a master of masks. And I learned early on that masks always slip, if you're patient enough. So I waited. And I watched. Because something inside me knew. One day she'd go too far. And when she did, I'd be ready. To the outside world, and especially to my dad, Laila was a saint. She baked fresh bread on Sundays. She ironed his shirts with care. She laughed at all his tired jokes like they were brand new. Neighbors complimented her garden, and guests praised how warm and gracious she was. She never raised her voice. She never said a word that could be quoted against her. But what no one saw was what happened in the quiet in-between moments, the space between smiles and silence, where her real self lived. To my dad, she was a second chance at happiness. To me, she was a subtle kind of storm, slow, invisible, and calculated. It was never outright abuse. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she chipped away at me piece by piece. She'd forget to pack my lunch and then tell my dad I said I wasn't hungry. She'd swap out my shampoo and claim I must have left the cap off when I started getting rashes. And every time I brought something up, however gently, she'd give me that look. The one that said, "You better be careful how you talk about me." "Sweetheart," she'd say to my dad with just enough concern in her voice. "I think she's still struggling. She's been very distant. Maybe a counselor would help." He'd nod, looking at me like I was a project to be fixed. Meanwhile, Laila would offer me tea with too much sugar and a side of false sympathy. She loved to cook, but I started to notice that there were meals only I was ever told to eat. Sometimes she'd make a dish and tell my dad, "Oh, you don't like this one, remember? It's just for her." At first, I thought it was her trying to connect with me until I noticed the pattern. I always felt off afterward. Dizzy. Nauseated. But only when she served me food no one else touched. One night she made chicken curry. Just for me. My dad had already eaten out with a friend. I barely had 2 bites before something felt wrong. Tight chest, numb fingers. I told myself it was stress. Had to be. But when I confronted her, carefully, cautiously, she tilted her head and smiled like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Sweetheart," she cooed, "you're always so sensitive. Maybe you're just imagining things." That's when I realized. She wanted me to question myself. She wanted me to doubt my instincts. It was her favorite game. Gaslight me until I shrank small enough to disappear. And it was working. My dad never saw it. Not because he didn't care, but because she was just that good. She never gave him a reason not to trust her. Her performance was flawless. Her mask airtight. But masks have cracks. And I was done pretending not to see them. The body doesn't lie. Even when the mind tries to rationalize, excuse, or ignore, it remembers. And mine had been screaming for a while. It wasn't until that Tuesday night that I finally stopped brushing off the signs. Laila had made lentil soup. Simple, bland, comfort food. She ladled it into a bowl just for me. "Your dad's not hungry tonight," she said with a smile too thin to trust. "You should eat before it gets cold." I ate half a bowl, slowly, cautiously. Within an hour, my stomach was tight and churning, my head foggy. My hands trembled slightly when I reached for my phone. Again. It wasn't the first time this had happened. Suddenly, the past started coming into sharper focus. A string of quiet incidents I had filed away as coincidence. Fainting at school after a special breakfast she made for me. A weekend of vomiting after she insisted I try her cleansing tea. A dizzy spell during an exam after eating the yogurt she left on my desk. All of it I had blamed on myself. Stress, dehydration, maybe a bug. But it always happened after I ate something only she had prepared. Only me. Never my dad. Never herself. That night, I poured the rest of the soup down the sink and rinsed the bowl clean. When Laila asked if I wanted more, I forced a yawn and said I was too tired to finish. She just smiled, but her eyes flickered, barely. That flicker said everything. After that, I stopped eating anything she gave me. If she made tea, I'd pretend to sip. If she served food, I'd push it around my plate until she left the room. Then I'd flush it, trash it, feed it to the dog next door. Anything but let it touch my lips. And I watched her. Closely. I noticed the small tics. The way she hovered when I took my first bite. How she'd relax only once I swallowed. I noticed how her expression shifted ever so slightly when I made excuses not to eat. Not annoyed. Disappointed. It was all too calculated. I began keeping a secret journal. Not just about the food but about everything. Times, dates, symptoms, her words. Just in case. Not because I had a plan. But because my gut said I might need proof one day. And I'd finally learned to trust it. It started with the smell of saffron. I walked in from school to find the kitchen filled with the scent of biryani. My mother's recipe. The one dish I hadn't tasted in years. Laila stood at the stove, humming softly, wearing an apron and a smile like she belonged there. I stopped in the doorway. "What's the occasion?" She turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "You've been so stressed lately, sweetheart. I thought I'd make you something special. Your favorite, right?" Her voice was syrupy. Too smooth. I nodded slowly, careful not to let my suspicion show. Something wasn't right. She'd never gone out of her way like this. Not for me. Dinner was oddly perfect. She'd even lit candles, set the table like we were hosting someone. My dad wasn't home, out late for work, she'd said. Just us. She scooped a generous serving onto my plate. "Eat up," she chirped. "You're always skipping meals." I forced a smile. "Thanks, Laila." We sat across from each other. She barely touched her own food, just watched me. Her eyes didn't blink much. I picked up my fork, heart pounding, and took a small bite. I chewed slowly, buying time. Tasted fine. But my stomach turned anyway. Not from the food, but from fear. I excused myself to grab a napkin from the kitchen. In those few seconds out of her sight, I slid most of the biryani into a sandwich bag I'd stashed in my hoodie pocket. Just in case. Then I returned to the table and smiled like everything was normal. "Delicious," I said. Her eyes flicked to my plate, then to my face. "You sure?" "Yeah." Just not that hungry tonight. She didn't press. Just leaned back and sipped her water, eyes unreadable. That night I didn't get sick. But something else happened. Around midnight, I got up for water and heard a voice coming from the hallway. Laila. Whispering. I crept closer, heart thudding in my ears. I don't know, she hissed. She barely touched it. Thought this time. I did everything right. Long pause. No signs. Nothing. Like it didn't work. Froze. I couldn't hear the other voice, but I didn't need to. My mouth went dry. My lungs forgot how to breathe. It was real. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't imagining things. She was trying to poison me. And it didn't work. For a second I wanted to burst into the room, scream, cry, throw the truth in her face. But something stopped me. A deeper voice inside. Colder, wiser, calmer. The same voice that had been quietly watching her all this time. Don't react. She doesn't know you know. I stepped back down the hall, silent as a breath, and returned to bed. Lay there with my eyes open in the dark, heart pounding like a war drum. But I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I had all the proof I needed now. And she had no idea. The game had just shifted. I wasn't the quiet, naive girl she thought I was anymore. I was awake now. And I was done playing her game by her rules. I didn't get revenge. Got smart. After that night, the whisper, it didn't work. I knew I had to move carefully. One wrong step, and she'd vanish behind her mask again. Deny everything. Smile her way out like she always did. But this time I wasn't the scared, quiet girl in her shadow. This time I had a plan. The next evening, I asked her if there were leftovers from the biryani. Her eyes lit up just slightly. Of course, she said, already reaching for the container. You must be feeling better. I accepted it with a thank you and went straight to my room. Didn't eat a bite. Instead, I took a small glass vial I'd borrowed from the science lab and sealed a spoonful of rice inside. Then I slid it into a sandwich bag, wrapped it in socks, and hid it deep in my backpack. Next came the performance. 2 hours later, I stumbled into the living room holding my stomach, breathing hard, eyes glassy. Laila! I croaked, collapsing onto the couch. She jumped up like lightning. What's wrong? I think it was the biryani. I gasped, my voice breaking on cue. She tried to hide her satisfaction, but I saw it. A flicker of success in her expression before she masked it with false concern. She offered to call my dad, but I told her no. I just needed to lie down. She hovered at my door for a bit, then left me alone. Perfect. The next morning, while she was out running errands, I made my move. I called Ms. Claire, my old counselor from middle school. She was one of the few adults I ever trusted. She'd always said, "If you ever need help, I'm here. No judgment." So I called. I didn't give her every detail at first. Just enough. I told her I suspected someone in my house was poisoning me. That I had a food sample. That I needed to know what was in it. She didn't gasp. She didn't lecture. She just said, "Bring it to me quietly." Within 3 days the results were back. I met her in the back room of the school office, palms sweating as she handed me the sealed envelope. "Traces of toxins," she said quietly. "Low dose. But repeated exposure could do serious harm." My heart stopped. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. "Do you want me to call the police?" she asked gently. I shook my head. Not yet. I needed to be sure, bulletproof. So I started building a case. I documented every incident I could remember. What I ate, what happened after, how Laila acted. I printed call logs, dates, even copied down what I overheard that night. I kept my journal hidden at school, stored everything on a flash drive locked in my locker. I took photos of her food, recorded her when she didn't know I was listening. I learned to smile when she served me dinner, to nod to say thank you, while secretly slipping the food into sealed bags I'd hide and label. I became her mirror. Controlled. Polite. And she never suspected a thing. But I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing this to end it for good. She set the stage. But I would write the final act. It happened on a rainy Thursday. The kind of evening that makes the world feel hushed, like it's holding its breath. Laila made dinner. Again. Stuffed bell peppers, her signature. She hummed as she set the table, acting like she was auditioning for some domestic award. Dad was home this time, scrolling through his phone on the couch, oblivious. She placed a plate in front of me, eyes glittering. "You always loved this dish," she said. "I used extra seasoning for you." Smiled back. "How thoughtful." She turned to grab her own plate from the counter. And that was when I did it, quick, smooth, the kind of movement you only perfect after weeks of practice. I swapped the plates. She never noticed. We all sat down. Dad ate absently, praising the flavor. I chewed slowly, pushing food around, but I kept an eye on her. She took 3 full bites before I saw it. First, the twitch in her cheek. Then the blink that lasted too long. Her fingers trembled slightly against her glass. She cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she said, standing up, but she staggered. Dad was up in a second. "Laila." She clutched the back of a chair, then collapsed to her knees. "Call someone," he shouted, panicked. I already had my phone out. Teddy. "Yes, we need an ambulance. Possible poisoning." The word made Dad look at me like I'd slapped him. But I kept my voice clear. "She's been targeting me for weeks. I have proof." Paramedics arrived within minutes. They carried Laila out on a stretcher, barely conscious, mumbling incoherently. Dad rode with her, still dazed, still refusing to believe what was unfolding. I followed in a separate car, flash drive in my pocket, evidence bag tucked into my coat. At the hospital I waited. Hours passed. Finally a nurse came out. "She's stable now." But the toxicology. There were traces of rat poison in her system. Dad was pale. "But how?" "She cooked the meal," I said softly. "The plate she served herself was meant for me." He turned to me, horrified. "What are you saying?" I opened my bag and pulled out the folder. The printed results, the photos, the journal entries, everything. "She's been poisoning me." Slowly. For weeks. Maybe months. Tonight she made a mistake. A nurse confirmed. Layla's fingerprints were all over the food containers. The toxic dose matched the substance found in earlier tests I'd had analyzed. Dad sat down heavily in the hospital chair. I didn't expect him to say anything. He didn't. Later the police arrived. I handed over everything, neatly organized. No emotion, just facts. They nodded, impressed. "She's not going to hurt anyone again," one officer said quietly. And that was the moment I felt it. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Relief. It was over. Karma didn't knock on the door. She cooked dinner and Karma pulled up a chair. The queen had fallen. And no one even saw it coming. Layla's charm evaporated in the harsh light of the investigation room. The woman who used to smile at neighbors, who waved politely at school events, who kissed my dad on the cheek like a loving wife, she was gone. What was left behind wasn't tragic. It was hollow. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She just stared, like a cornered fox with nowhere left to run. They charged her within days. The toxicology report, my journal, the recordings, my saved food samples. It all lined up too perfectly to be dismissed. The poison was traced back to her online orders. Even her search history betrayed her. How much arsenic is fatal? How to poison without trace. Natural-looking food poisoning symptoms. Dad was crushed. He sat on the porch for hours the night she was taken away. Didn't speak. Just stared out like he could undo the past by thinking hard enough. I didn't interrupt him. I wasn't ready to comfort anyone. Not yet. The neighborhood changed too. People whispered. Her friends, those wine night gossipers who once called her elegant, avoided our house. Some had the decency to look ashamed. Others acted like they didn't know us at all. The school counselor, Ms. Claire, called to check in. So did one of my teachers, gently offering support. But I didn't need it, not like before. 'Cause I was still standing. And that was enough. Sometimes I would sit in my room and remember the little signs I'd buried so deep. The way she used to flinch when I came into a room too quietly. How she always insisted on making my meals personally. How she'd watch me eat with an intensity that wasn't maternal. It was morbid. A strange fascination. I remembered the night I threw up after eating her stew, and she told me it was just stress. The way she always had a reason, always a soft, manipulative excuse. And I remembered how no one believed me back then, not even myself. How I convinced myself I was dramatic, overly sensitive. But I wasn't. I was right. And I didn't need anyone else to acknowledge it. I didn't need a parade or an apology. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. And now, finally, I had it. Laila had ruled the house like a silent dictator. Her poison subtle, her games invisible. But she forgot one thing. Quiet girls aren't always blind. Sometimes we see everything. We just wait. And when the time comes, we rise. Not to destroy, but to survive. And I had. Laila was charged with attempted poisoning, endangerment, and premeditated harm. The trial didn't last long, her searches, the evidence, the toxins in her own system. It was all too clear. Her mask had slipped, and there was no fixing it. My father tried to apologize, over and over. He cried not just from guilt, but from the weight of realizing he'd loved someone capable of that kind of evil. I should have seen it, he said one night. His voice barely above a whisper. I let you down. I didn't tell him he didn't. I didn't tell him he did. I just said, I know. 'Cause he needed space to break. And I had already broken long ago. And rebuilt myself. Eventually I packed my bags and left that house. Whether it was for college or just for fresh air, it didn't matter. I needed a clean start. Somewhere her shadow couldn't reach. But I took the journal with me. Every scribbled word. Every date. Every quiet moment I noticed something and wrote it down instead of screaming. It wasn't just a record of what she'd done. It was proof that I'd survived it. That I trusted my gut. That I fought without shouting and still won. They called me quiet. But I was never weak. And I never will be. I live alone now. A small apartment, nothing fancy, but filled with peace. No watching eyes. No second-guessing every bite I take. Sometimes I flip through my old journal, not out of fear, but as a reminder of what it means to trust yourself when no one else does. Of how strength doesn't always look loud. People think danger comes with red flags and raised voices. But sometimes it wears perfume and smiles as it stirs your tea. Laila thought I was naive. She mistook silence for weakness. But I watched, I waited. And in the end, karma didn't miss.